Okay, you have been notified. This meeting is being recorded. Okay. All right, my name is Tracy Paff-Smith. I'm the Executive Director at the Huntington Historical Society, and I want to thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, and especially to all those who are joining us from outside of Huntington and Long Island. We're so happy to have you. I want to thank also everyone who made a donation when you registered. We so appreciate that. We, usually have our lunch and learns in person, and we have been doing this for about a year, and it's been really successful, and it's thanks to those who have made generous donations. Also, to everyone who's a member or renewed their membership when they signed up, we appreciate you so much. And finally, to our sponsor for our virtual lunch and learns, People's United Bank. They also sponsored our in-person and very graciously moved over to start sponsoring our virtual lunch and learns, and we so appreciate their support. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker today. We're so thrilled to welcome Jeff Richman, who is the historian over at Greenwood Cemetery, but he's also a Huntington resident. He's a local. He is only the second person to hold the position of historian in the cemetery's 183-year existence. And he is also author of Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery, New York's Buried Treasure. I will put a link into the chat box at the end so that you can look into the book if you're interested in purchasing it. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Well, thank you, Tracy, and it is a pleasure to be here for this lunch and learn with the Huntington Historical Society. I have lived in Huntington since 1978, raised my children here, and do love Huntington, so it is a particular pleasure to be doing this for this organization. I, as Tracy said, have been the Greenwood historian now since full-time since 2007. I practiced law before that for 33 years as a criminal defense attorney for indigents. And in 2007, having worked part-time at Greenwood for some 7 years, I decided that I had had enough of the law and wanted to work at Greenwood. So it was initially supposed to be a part-time job, 25 hours a week, and then kind of grew from there. So I am currently the historian at Greenwood and have put together a slideshow for you to give you a much better idea of the cemetery. And so let's share that with you now and just head on back here to our first image. And here we go. So Greenwood Cemetery is in Brooklyn at the very west end of Long Island. It dates from 1838. It was one of the first rural cemeteries in America. And the idea of a rural cemetery was that you were going to have this space where people could be interred. People were no longer to be in their churchyard. They were no longer exclusively going to be interred with their congregants, but they might be Episcopalians and a few Catholics and some Lutherans and some Methodists and Protestants and all sorts of Christian sects. And so the idea was find this place sufficiently out of the urban center, but close enough that people could visit on a day trip by horse or carriage. And so here we are. This is the edge of the East River. The Brooklyn Bridge would be up in here, and Greenwood here, and you can see Prospect Park. So Greenwood actually predates Prospect Park. Greenwood established 1838. It becomes the argument by the 1850s for Central Park, a centrally located park. The leading advocates for a central park say, look at Greenwood. This place is just a magnet for visitation. It is getting 500,000 people a year visiting there. and imagine if we were to build a centrally located park. And so Prospect Park follows by Olmsted and Vaux also. And you can see that Greenwood is a little bit smaller than Prospect Park. So we're 478 acres at Greenwood. And Central Park is slightly over 800 acres. So, somewhat comparable in size. Here's a closer look at Greenwood, and you see these winding roads and the paths that connect them. And so the idea was very much to have these limited visibility paths where part of the experience was to explore and to discover on your own. And so it was unlike 34th Street in Manhattan, where you can see from river to river. Here, you could only see a short distance. And so that was by intent, the idea being that you would not know what was around the bend. Was it going to be an obelisk or an angel or something very, very creative? And so Greenwood is a National Historic Landmark. We were so designated in 2006, one of only about a half dozen cemeteries in America that have that designation, honored as a National Historic Landmark. This is David Bates Douglas, who designed Greenwood. He was an engineer in 1837 and 1838 when Greenwood was being planned. You couldn't go on the internet and look for a landscape designer or architect. There was no such profession, and there was no internet, of course. And so David Bates Douglas had been a military engineer, had fought in the War of 1812, had built canals and sewer systems, knew the Brooklyn area from work he had done there. And so he became really the genius who designed this place. And this is one of the features, is a tour I did. We've done some large tours at the cemetery. I first did tours in 1991 and continue to do tours now. And you see these banks that are a feature of David Bates Douglas design, the idea being to lower the roads and to raise up the gravestones. And so as you walk by at eye level, the gravestones are really as they would be on an altar. Here are the main gates of the cemetery. And so the cemetery has 4 New York City landmarks as part of the cemetery. And so these are the main gates, which date from the Civil War, 1861 to 63, by Richard Upjohn and Son. Upjohn did Trinity Church at the head of Wall Street. This he considered the Gothic revival, his best design. And it's got this upward pointing thrust to it. And it's very much about the Christian theology that underlay the cemetery. So this is all about resurrection. I am the resurrection and the life. Weep not. And 2 on the other side. And here we are lit up the main gates. And here are the main gates, about 1865, a wonderfully period photograph with these 2 little girls dressed as one would have dressed in the 1860s to visit a cemetery. And then this is the Weir McGovern Greenhouse, which is right across the entrance from the cemetery at 25th Street and 5th Avenue in Brooklyn. The cemetery purchased this in 2012, and it is now being converted into an education and visitor center. And then we are building around it a archives and gallery space and office space. This is the Fort Hamilton Parkway side of the cemetery. And this is by the son, Richard Mitchell Upjohn, the son of Richard Upjohn. And this is 1876 that this was built. And so Fort Hamilton Parkway is a major thoroughfare through this area of Brooklyn, and these still exist. They were restored just a few years ago and are in excellent shape at this point. And we do have actually an artist in residence in this building here. So we had a competition, some 800 applications submitted for that. And here is our historic chapel, which dates from 1910, 1911 by Warren and Wetmore, who designed Grand Central, the New York Yacht Club, the Yale Club in New York. And so very, very prominent society architects. Greenwood has a long tradition of tourism. So this is a wonderful photograph circa 1900, showing again the main gates, but showing tourists wandering the cemetery. And so it was very much the tradition of rural cemeteries to invite tourists to come visit, whether they own graves at the cemetery or own lots at the cemetery or not, in the hopes that at the end of their visit, they would ask the magic question, which was, are there lots available and could I purchase one? And so Greenwood encouraged all of this visitation with all sorts of souvenir photograph books that people could purchase. There was what was called a tour, which was a specified route of the cemetery to kind of hit the highlights in the 1860s, 1870s. And so for 25 cents, a carriage driver would take you around and narrate your visit. And then, of course, we have the famous at Greenwood. So Greenwood has a total of 575,000 plus people interred on its grounds. And one of them is the very well-known composer and conductor, Leonard Bernstein. And here is Lenny conducting, very dramatic conductor and very politically involved also. And then at our left is Andy Warhol, who is not at Greenwood, but to his right is Jean-Michel Basquiat. And they collaborated on a number of things, including this photograph. And Basquiat, this is an example of his painting. Basquiat died at a very young age, but his paintings now go in the tens of millions of dollars, and one sold recently for about $110 million. Other notables at Greenwood, Samuel Morse, who was in addition to being the inventor of the telegraph, was also one of the pioneers of American photography, and was also the leading painter in New York City of his time, elected by his peers as the first president of the National Academy of Design. The telegraph was kind of the internet of its time, in that before the telegraph came along, if you wanted to send a message, you basically had to tuck it into your pocket or your purse and carry it to where you wanted it to go. And the telegraph allowed messages to be sent within seconds over a much broader and faster path. Boss Tweed is interred at Greenwood, as is Frank Morgan, who of course played the Wizard of Oz in the movie. Horace Greeley, well known for his Go West Young Man and also for running for president in 1872. Dying soon thereafter, and President U.S. Grant visited Greenwood for Greeley's funeral. Henry Chadwick, the father of baseball, with this wonderful monument with the granite carved baseball on top. One of the symbols of the Victorian age was the globe, which has no beginning and no end. It is eternity. And so here, the globe was modified to put laces on it, so that it looked like a baseball. And you see on the front of his monument, a baseball diamond, and then crossed bats and a glove and baseballs that are left by pilgrims to his grave. And what's wonderful also is that the four corners of his lot are marked with these granite bases with the straps across them, as they would have been at the time of his death. So Chadwick came up with many of the expressions that we know today in baseball, runs batted in, all sorts of terminology, but also invented the scoring system. So the next time you go to a baseball game or watch it on TV and you write down 6-4-3 for the shortstop to the second baseman to the first baseman. That's thanks to Henry Chadwick. And he was dubbed the father of baseball by none other than President Theodore Roosevelt. Nathaniel Currier, and so, of course, of the firm, the print firm of Currier and Ives, and Mr. Ives is also buried at Greenwood. And here is I kind of like this photograph because it's a reunion of Greenwood's two historians. And so here is Nehemiah Cleveland, as he is buried at Greenwood, and he died in the 1870s. And then this is me here, and I am Greenwood's second historian. So we had a bit of a gap between our historians. Here I am doing a tour. This is a spirited stroll, also known as a Halloween tour. So actually we've scheduled 2 tours for that weekend, the end of October, that I will be doing, and we highlight spirits and murders and such things for those tours. We do have a trolley that we've had for a number of years now, and we just got a second trolley. So our trolley has been shut down during the pandemic, but will be reactivated in the fall. And we can seat 56 people on this trolley, and it's a wonderful opportunity for either a private tour or a themed tour. And so the cemetery is a big place, 478 acres, about a mile by a mile. It's impossible to walk from one end to the other and back in a decent amount of time. And so the trolley allows me in particular to create all sorts of theme tours, whether it's a baseball tour or a Civil War tour, or the painters of Greenwood, or the women of Greenwood, or the suffragists of Greenwood. We can do all of that with our trolley. And so just a few views of the cemetery. Is really a spectacular space. It is a park, it's an arboretum. And so we are a certified arboretum for the variety of trees, some 7,000 plus trees that we have there, and plantings in the last few years, increasing the variety of trees that we have at the cemetery. And so this is the Steinway tomb, the largest tomb in the cemetery. Of course, the Piano family. And so we have a number of brand names, Durkee Spices and Pfizer and Squibb are at Greenwood. FAO Schwartz is at Greenwood. So many names that we recognize today. And just some of the beautiful cherry blossoms in the spring, some wonderful sculpture in the fall, the Valentine Angel. Elias Howe, the inventor of the sewing machine, with a bronze bust by Charles Calverley. DeWitt Clinton, a monument that was crucial to the development of the cemetery, which was this revolutionary break from that idea of churchyard burial, and was having trouble in its early years. And so the cemetery contacted DeWitt Clinton's son and asked if it would be okay to dig up his father and bring him to Greenwood from where he was buried up near Albany, and got the go-ahead. And this is by public subscription, the second oldest heroic bronze cast in America, after the Andrew Jackson in Lafayette Square Park in Washington, D.C., right opposite the White House. So the idea was to lure people into the cemetery and again, get them to ask that question, are there lots for sale, and how much and where? So the cemetery is also a really four-season place, spectacular in the winter. This is the Van Ness Parsons Pyramid with a mix of Old Testament, Moses and his mother here, Jesus and Mary here, Egyptian, the Sphinx here, Osiris, the god, Egyptian god, safeguarding tombs and mausolea. And even, you can just barely see it here, the shadow of Ra. So this would have been a bronze that was stolen from the cemetery about 50 years ago. And what's particularly wonderful here is not that it was stolen, but that the sun itself has burnt the image of Ra, the sun god, into the wall there. Another image in the winter. And so we do have sculpture by noted sculptors of 19th century New York. This is by Carl Mueller, Lieutenant Hidden. And we do also have a collection. And so I was able to buy this at auction for the cemetery. And you can see that this exact pose here by Mueller on the bronze is in marble, also signed on the bottom by Carl Mueller. Here is a carving Precious Georgie, a marble cameo protected from the elements by Charles Calverley. And since I took this photograph, it has been cleaned and restored. And then this is also by Carl Mueller, who did the Lieutenant Hidden that we just saw. And this is for John Matthews, the Soda Fountain King, and really a spectacular piece with all sorts of animals running amok here throughout there. And this was one of my things on my bucket list. The rain comes down and washes through these gargoyles and out of their mouths. And so I wanted to get out there on a winter day and get the icicles frozen in the gargoyles. So mission accomplished. This is Stewart. So many of you, I think, know the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and these are her parents. She is herself buried at Mount Auburn up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But this is a collaboration of Stanford White from McKim and White, one of the leading architects that the United States has produced, and of course, lived out in Smithtown, and Augustus St. Gaudens, who did these sculptures of these wonderful angels here. And just a quick note, you see that these three stones, this one looks a bit grayer than the other two, and that's because this one was deteriorating. And so a restoration team came in and removed this capstone with a crane. This whole piece came off, and then they took out the damaged stone, and they had worked on the steps of the 42nd Street Library and had a stone that was a pretty good match. And so that's where this stone came from. Henry Berg, the founder of the ASPCA, is interred at Greenwood. This is the seal in bronze of the ASPCA. And this sculpture is on permanent loan from the ASPCA, used to hang on their building. And when they relocated and the building was not strong enough to support this, dating from the 1950s, this piece went into storage. And we did an exhibition in 2006 with the ASPCA. And one thing led to another, and this was taken out of storage and is now on permanent loan to Greenwood. We also have our archives. And so these are the records of the cemetery. And so some wonderful blueprints, some spectacular drawings, and some documents that exist nowhere else in the world. And so we have millions of documents. We have a genealogy program, which allows individuals to contact that program and to get as much information as we have that really doesn't exist anywhere else. This is a page from one of our chronological books. And so these were burials. You see, this is from 1865, January 29th, and the burials that were undertaken that day. And so these are wonderful records. We got a grant from the NEH a number of years ago to scan all of these, and now we have a grant to make all of this searchable. So this will be amazing when you can go in here and find everybody who was born in the West Indies or in Germany or in Massachusetts and be able to pull that information up, or everybody who died in the pandemic of 1918 or who died at Gettysburg in July of 1863 and were sent back to Greenwood. And I am a lifelong collector, and so I love to collect. I have a collection of Huntington stoneware, and I collected a good deal of material on behalf of Greenwood. So this is part of our library. We have about 1,000 volumes, books pertaining to people who are interred at the cemetery or the cemetery itself. Stereo views, we have about 700 of these showing what the cemetery looked like in circa 1870. Objects, this is by Walter Dorwin Teague, who was one of the leading designers of the 20th century. This is Lorillard tobacco. This is more Teague material. These are a camera by Teague. The Somers family was in the tin lithography business, so they have it here, and you can just barely see DUR. So this is a Durkee spice. And then more material that we have collected over the years. So we have about 8,000 items that I have collected on behalf of the cemetery. And one of those items is this sword that you see here. And so I did, over the years, have done blog posts of my discoveries at Greenwood. And there was a fellow by the name of Richard Thorne, who was a pre-Civil War militia officer. And this is a book, a one-of-a-kind book from the men who served under him, paying tribute to him as their commander. And so I put up a blog post and I said that we have information that the men also presented a sword to Thorne. And next thing I knew, I was hearing from a fellow in Kentucky who had the sword. And so you can just barely make out lettering here, which says presented to Richard V.W. Thorne, and just a beautiful piece to have reunited with that dedication book. Here is Louis Moreau Gottschalk. He was a composer and pianist, child prodigy, internationally known, tremendously popular in Europe and the United States and South America in the mid-19th century. This is a photograph that we have from our archives showing what his monument looked like initially. And you see a fence around the monument. But this is pretty much what the monument looked like about 6-7 years ago. The angel on top had disappeared. And I was authorized to bid on an auction up in New Hampshire to get a replacement fence. The original fence, which had musical instruments cast in iron, had been removed in the 1920s at the cemetery's urging, which it was just a matter of maintenance and cost primarily. And so the cemetery had written to the family and asked them if they'd be willing to have their fence removed at no charge, and they would never have to paint it again. And that's what the cemetery did. And so we wanted to put a fence back here in about 6-7 years ago, and bought this fence, and our metal shop put it together, and they put together this frame now. And basically it's kind of the shape of a piano. And then we had a design competition. The top sculptors in America submitted their entries, and this is the winner in position on that monument now in bronze. And then Civic Virtue, which has traveled from Manhattan to Queens under the aegis of New York City. And then New York City decided they really couldn't take care of it, and it had some controversy to it. And so Greenwood offered to give it a home where it is now. The Greeter, a tribute to George Catlin, who is interred back at the back of this lot here. So this was in 2016. John Coleman, the sculptor, donated this piece as a tribute to Catlin, who is primarily known for his paintings of Native Americans. And this was unusual in that we had just unveiled this monument and a hawk flew over, and that's what our two presenters are reacting to here. The Beard Bear, another sculpture. This was the first 21st century sculpture, extended our sculpture collection into the 21st century. You see in this photograph a Norway maple, and that Norway maple, as we'll see shortly, is no longer there because much of it fell in Hurricane Sandy. Greenwood, at the beginning of the pandemic in March of last year, was petitioned by a neighborhood group to open up all of our gates so that people could walk during the pandemic. And the cemetery thought about that. Other cemeteries went in a different way and basically closed their gates. Greenwood's leadership, I think much to its credit, decided that the thing to do was to make it accessible, but within the rules of the cemetery. And so one of our programming people recruited 250 ambassadors. And these are ambassadors who were charged with making sure that people were respectful in their use of the cemetery. And I think that worked out very, very well. A few people had to be told that it was not a place for getting a tan in a bathing suit, but beyond that, or climbing trees, but it worked out very well. And these ambassadors have been just great at Greenwood. We also have free concerts, and so unfortunately the Memorial Day concerts have been canceled the last 2 years, but I think we'll be back next year. Also quite a bit of programming. So this was our Angel and Accordion series that we did, dancing across the cemetery grounds. This is from our Open Doors tour, and so that's scheduled for October of this year. I lead that and give people fact sheets, which they share, and we've done costuming from the Theater Development Fund over the years. And so this is one of our volunteers ready to explain the Van Ness Parsons Pyramid to visitors. And then just recently, the beginning of June, our programming people worked with the New York Philharmonic, and musicians, approximately 20 musicians from the Philharmonic came out and played on the grounds, the first time they had played together since the pandemic began. And this is a quintet of brass within feet of Leonard Bernstein's grave, and they played selections from West Side Story as the sun was setting. And here with it dark in the cemetery, this is the Chauncey Mausoleum, which dates from 1852, and a string quartet that played here. And this is very recent also, Naming the Lost, a tribute to those who died of COVID. And so the fence at the cemetery was covered with photographs and tributes to people. We have a very active restoration team. So this was the first head of our restoration team, showing us the mold that he created from one of the original eagles, so that he could then cast a replacement eagle for, this is a Civil War General George Crockett Strong from Vermont, who is interred at Greenwood. And then I mentioned Hurricane Sandy. This is one of 3 mausolea that were sadly substantially damaged by trees falling on them during Hurricane Sandy. We lost about 300 trees also. And we did get a grant from New York State, a recovery grant, and these have all been rebuilt now. I had a 19th century scholar come in to look at this, and he was very, very excited because he could see construction techniques from the 19th century that he otherwise had not been able to observe. And then here, this is an angel that stood in front of that bear with that Norway maple just behind the bear, and you can see a crack here. And so I went back into Greenwood about 2 or 3 days after Hurricane Sandy and was able to retrieve this arm that had been cracked off by the maple coming down on this piece. and also one of the wings that had come off. And about a year after that, our restoration team put this back together. So they do wonderful work. We did have a wonderful metal shop. Unfortunately, Dominic retired a few years ago, but this was a fence that was hit by another Norway maple, and they rebuilt this area here and also redid some of these onion-shaped pieces. The restoration team also pulls stones out of the ground, and so there's a annual group of high school students who come in and work for a week or two pulling stones up. And then we also have a training program. And so this is Neela Romasinghe, who is the head of our restoration team. She has studied extensively on restoration techniques, and she now puts together every year in the spring a team to learn how to be masons and become members of the union and to work on brownstones and other buildings in New York City primarily. And so this, you can see, was one of their projects up above Sylvan Water. And this is one of my favorite things. There's a company from Germany called Karcher, and they came to America just a few years ago trying to promote their equipment and techniques. And so one of the things that they have is a cleaning device. And so let's just take a look at this. This is in quicker motion, of course, but this is a device. There's a steam maker at the end, the other end of this hose, and it creates a hot water, no chemicals, no pressure, that removes 150 years of dirt and grime from monuments. And so you can see how effective that is. So periodically I can tell where they've been based on the whiteness of the marble. And then I wanted to tie in a little bit of Greenwood and Huntington. And so just a few years ago, the Camberling family home was on a house tour that the Huntington Historical Society ran, and I knew that name. He was a congressman from New York, had owned a summer home in Huntington, and so I did a fair amount of research and left that research when I visited that home on the house tour. So there were a number of people, obviously, who spent their summers in Huntington and then went back to the city. This is a fellow from East Northport. In February, we launched our World War II project. So I've already led a Civil War project to identify and write the stories of Civil War veterans at Greenwood. We started that in 2002. I was young and naive back then and thought that perhaps we would find 500 Civil War veterans at Greenwood. We have passed 5,200, and each of them has a online biography on our website. And so we also did World War I in 2017 and 18, and then 2021, February, just a few months ago, we started with World War II. And the response has just been extraordinary. We've gotten over 300 subjects, mostly from the sons of and daughters of these veterans, with wonderful photographs from their album. And so this is a William Bradford, who was in the Navy and was from Northport and is buried at Greenwood Cemetery. And so here he is on deck. I believe this is him here. Here is the ship that he served on, the USS Curtis. And here he is later in life. And so I just find it remarkable, these photographs. You know, when we did Civil War, when we did World War I, we rarely heard from families, and certainly didn't in any kind of numbers get photographs of them. And so to be able to pretty routinely get these photographs has really been a thrill for me. And so these are being posted online as we do them. I have about 25 volunteers who are working either as researchers or as writers to put these biographies together.
I don't want to interrupt, but that was my dad.
Really?
Yeah. That's my dad.
Wow. You know, years ago, I did a book talk at a library. I think it might have been in Brentwood. And I put up a image of a floral display of a slot machine. And when I put it, so it had been at someone's grave. And when I put that up, I heard the scream. And the person yells, "That's my mother." And so that was her. She had loved going to Atlantic City, and they had put out this slot machine with 777s and flowers at the cemetery. Wow. So were you in touch with me on this?
Yes, I sent you all this information about him.
Oh, okay, great, great. All right, well, thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And so just as a kind of segue before we go to our Q&A period, just to go back to the trolley, I know I've had discussions over the years with staff from Huntington Historical Society about leading a tour for them of Greenwood, and I'd be very, very happy to do that either in the fall or the spring. Our trolley has been inactive, but will be starting again in September and October. And so that's something to think about, or even in the spring if that works better. And then I just wanted to segue to my book. And so I am hoping to do a talk for the Huntington Historical Society about this book, Building the Brooklyn Bridge, 1869 to 1883, an illustrated history with images in 3D. This is my fourth book. My first book was a general book about Greenwood. Second book was about Greenwood's Civil War veterans in their own words. Third book was about one particular Civil War veteran and the arcs and the drama of his life. And then this book now. And so this has about 250 illustrations, 42 of which are in 3D. And so I was just showing Tracy before my 3D glasses. And so I think we could have a wonderful time, hopefully in person, doing a little bit of a discussion of this book and maybe selling a few copies. And so that's hopefully down the road. So it's been a pleasure, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have now.
Terrific, Jeff. Thank you so, so much. All right, let me get our chat box up here. All right, so nobody has asked yet, but while I get the chat box up, would you like to tell us about the display behind you?
Actually, I can immediately ask a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Let's see, my great-grandfather is actually buried in Greenwood. I believe that Greenwood has added sections from adjacent cemeteries over the years, because he's in the far west section. I think the number is 1094, and it's very, very plain. What headstones are there are very modest, and so it's not characteristic of most of the cemetery. So he was interred in 1915. So was there additions over the year to Greenwood Cemetery from adjacent cemeteries?
There were additions, but really not from adjacent cemeteries. And so these cemeteries originally chartered by New York State in 1838. April 18th of 1838, I know, because that happens to be my birthday also. So that's kind of the karma works out, and is chartered for 178 acres and then grows to 478 acres. So they're acquiring land as the demand increases and as the financial base of the cemetery is solidified, but they're not really acquiring other cemeteries. It's all adjacent land. What they are doing is creating public lots in what they consider to be the less attractive real estate at the cemetery. And so the areas along Border Avenue, between Border Avenue and the fence, are primarily public lots. The single question that I get most on tours is, did you have to be wealthy to be buried at Greenwood Cemetery? And the answer to that is a resounding no, because these public lots allowed for very inexpensive burial, $5 and $10 in the 19th century. And I have a volunteer who is working as we speak on counting how many people are buried in public lots. And so I never would have guessed, but he is now at about 180,000 of the 575,000. And so we're talking roughly 30% of all of the people interred at Greenwood are in these public lots, which are what you described, the fairly low size, not very elaborate monuments.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I've been to it, and there's no visible headstone on his lot. I was able to triangulate the approximate location using your website and the tombstones that did have a name. So I mean, the stone was either never put in place or it has since been subsumed into the earth.
Yes, we do have experiences. The Civil War soldiers lot has about 130 people interred there. And my screen just shifted. And we discovered, based on our maps, that there should have been more stones visible than what we were seeing. And so we sent a crew in there, and they pulled about 10 stones out of the ground. So stones do disappear into the ground simply by the vibration of the earth over time. And so if you were to contact me and give me information, so you can reach me at Richman at green-wood.com. So JEFFRICHMAN at green-wood.com. I can check our maps and see if there was any indication 100 years ago that there was a stone there.
All right, very good. And it's also interesting is that the Isabella Gardner was buried in Mount St. Albans, because I think that was the first rural style cemetery in the United States, if I remember correctly.
Right. That is 1831 Mount Auburn,
Yeah, just edged out.
servicing Boston.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
I
and
wanna-
you also, I see you're also a fan of the History Guy.
Excuse me?
Oh, your YouTube I guess favorites was up there, and I saw the History Guy a video in the queue.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it wasn't your screen, but anyway, a completely off topic.
All right. We do have some questions in the chat. I want to welcome Terry, who's joining us from Tanzania. She kind of got in a little bit late, so we didn't announce her, but thank you so much for joining us all the way from Tanzania. All right. First question, can you talk about the freedom lots?
Certainly, yes. So that was actually a section also. So that where we pulled stones out of the ground about 10 years ago, and then Neela and her team of high school students pulled more stones out about 2 or 3 years ago. And so the freedom lots were in the 19th century called the colored lots, and they were lots, I believe there were 7 lots at what had been the 9th Avenue entrance to the cemetery. And these were donated by the cemetery primarily for the burial of people of color. And so the Colored Orphan Asylum, which was attacked during the draft riots in 1863 in New York City, in the midst of the Civil War, had a lot there. We do know of a Civil War veteran, a man of color, who is interred there. But we had no idea until, again, a volunteer who works with me went through our archival books of the records of all of the burials. There are 1,330 people of color in those lots. And so they have been restored. There's now interpretive signage in that area, telling people, we have photographs of people, youngsters who lived in the colored orphan asylum out there. And we're also doing research now with people of color who are interred in their own lots at Greenwood. And so it appears, as best I can tell, that if you had money, even if you were African American, or you could come in and buy a lot in the general population of the cemetery, even as early as the 1850s. And so that's just a couple of decades removed from slavery being legal in New York State. And so again, I have a volunteer who's working on those lots and trying to determine how many people he can find census records for to be able to figure out race. The cemetery, the books I showed you, the chronological books, did not record race. They recorded things like the undertaker's name, the cause of death, the place of death, the residence of the person, the nativity, but not race. And so it's been a matter of basically one at a time being able to identify people of color who were interred at the cemetery.
All right, thank you. Another question, why the hyphenation in the name Greenwood?
I laugh because I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, someone wrote kind of a snarky letter to the Daily News saying that Greenwood was putting on airs and why the hyphen, it really wasn't necessary and whatever. And so I did some research, and I have a number of tour guides, 19th century tour guides in New York City. And you look at those tour guides and they just loved hyphens. And so the New York Historical Society still has the old spelling of New York, which is hyphenated. Wall Street, they hyphenated. And so there was a discussion, certainly David Bates Douglas, who I showed early on as the designer of the cemetery, he was involved in the discussions, what are we going to call this place? And one suggestion was the necropolis. And they decided that necropolis was not what they were going for, the city of the dead. They wanted something more sympathetic to nature. And so Greenwood was what emerged with the hyphen.
Ah, fascinating. I've noticed New York Historical has a hyphen. I never really thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Sherry asked, you mentioned the Christian beginnings of the cemetery. When were Jews permitted to be interred?
Permitted, we can't tell you because we do not have any documentation that says, you know, as of next year, Jews can be buried here. The first Jew that I know of buried at Greenwood is about 1890. And he was a member of the Austrian parliament, if I recall correctly, and was part of the revolutions of 1848 and then came to America. So we do have, you know, Bernstein. I have done the Jews of Greenwood tour. And so there aren't a lot that we've been able to identify, but the first one I know of is late in the 19th century.
Okay, good question. I'm a member of the Friends of Sagamore Hill and would like you to talk about the Roosevelt family plots. TR's father, mother, and first wife, Alice. His mother and first wife dies on the same day in 1884, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So his wife, TR's wife, was pregnant, expecting their first child. He was up in Albany. He received a telegram that his baby had been born, was doing fine, his daughter, and that his wife was okay. And so he was congratulated and cigars were lit up in Albany. And then he received a second telegram to come home immediately, that his wife was ill. And so he boarded a train, came back, think it was, they lived on 57th Street at the time. His brother meets him at the door and says, "This house is cursed. Both your mother and your wife are dying." And within 24 hours, they were both dead. And so there was a twin funeral, rosewood coffins, as the questioner correctly pointed out. On Valentine's Day, they had both died, and they were buried at Greenwood. His mother, I mean, the family is, of course, fascinating. Many books, you know, David McCullough's Mornings on Horseback. His mother is, by some accounts, the model for Margaret Mitchell's hero in Gone with the Wind, that she was this Southern belle. His father had a number of in-laws who fought for the Confederacy and apparently promised TR's mother that he would not fight against them. And so he did penance by going from camp to Union camp, the allotment, trying to get the soldiers to send their pay of $12 home to their wives to support them during the Civil War. And psychologically, I think that explains a lot of the charge up San Juan Hill that his father had not fought in the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And so there's that. We have done a video with the TR Association out at the gravesite. It's a very interesting circle. It's actually a underground vault where many of the bodies are interred, and some of the original floral decorations are still down there with the caskets and the remains.
Oh, wow. Can anyone access that, or is that a special access?
No.
Special access, okay. Next question, are people still buried there today?
Yes, the cemetery is still active. We average about 7 burials a day, 6 days a week, and about an equal number of cremations. Cremations have, I think, surpassed now in-ground burials. If someone purchased a lot in 1850 and 200 years from now, they show up at the cemetery and can convince the people running the cemetery that they are the descendants of the lot owners and have a right to burial there, then, you know, it exists in perpetuity, that right. And so the cemetery will be active for centuries to come with burials, but of course that will dissipate somewhat, which explains to some extent our pivot in this century, dating from about 1998, when the New York Times ran a article about this pivot with the headline, "Hoping to Lure a Livelier Crowd," and about how the cemetery was pivoting from being strictly a cemetery to a historic park, and now an arboretum and a sculpture garden. And so that's the direction we are very much going in at this point.
It said how to lure a livelier crowd.
Correct.
Oh my. All right. Next is, it looks like a comment. So Warren and Wetmore were the architects of the W.K. Vanderbilt summer home, now the museum in Centerport. So I think that was, she had made an earlier comment. This is Ivy, our educator, who also works over at Vanderbilt, and I can't remember what her earlier comment was.
All right. Let me just say, I did a tour for a group working for Suffolk County a few years ago. And as part of the preparation for the tour, one of their people came in, and as a result of that, they own a property designed by Ernest Flagg. And based on that lead that they supplied, I was able to determine that the mausoleum at Greenwood was also by Flagg, who did the Singer building. And so the fellow buried in this mausoleum or interred in this mausoleum was the president of Singer Sewing Machine.
Mm.
And he hired Flagg as his favorite architect. And so Flagg did his mansion in the Thousand Islands and did the Singer Building, which was one of the great skyscrapers in New York, no longer with us, sadly, and did this estate out on the South Shore of Long Island. And so, you know, that information based on research that I got a lead from people who were working in Suffolk.
Okay. Next question is, do you recall the story surrounding fireman Henry Fargus, Fargis, in lot 2414? He's a great great uncle.
Oh, really? Wow. Yes. I think that's actually covered in my first book. Fargus and Kerr died when a building collapsed. I think it was on Duane Street in Manhattan, right around 1850. And as a result of their deaths, it was then a volunteer fire department in New York City. It hadn't gone full-time professional until I think 1865. And so the volunteers came to Greenwood and they walked the grounds and they picked out a lot where they wanted all firemen, all volunteer firemen who had died in the line of duty to be interred. And so that was a matter of disinterring some. And ultimately, a number of families objected to that, and that didn't happen. But there is this wonderfully grand monument with a fireman atop it with a laurel, triumphant laurel wreath on him and saving a child. And to either side of that monument are substantial marble carvings, one for Fargus and one for Kerr. And then there is a circle with just initials on them of other firemen who died in the line of duty. And we have a wonderful print, which is actually reproduced in my book, of that lot circa 1850.
Terrific, thank you. And I just put in the chat box a link to Jeff's book, the one about the Greenwood Cemetery, and I will send that out in Jeff's email and all other information. When I send the recording, I'll send that out to everybody so that you have it. Another question, are you able to get close to a monument to take a picture? A volunteer
Took a picture.
took
Sorry.
a picture. Thank you. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes. The Gross Arts are part of my family, and there was a woodsman monument. Find a Grave took a picture for me. There's many names on the monument, but I couldn't read them all, and I'm just trying to do the history, and I live in North Carolina. Don't get to New York too much. Wondered why he couldn't get up close, and I thought maybe there's a lot of restrictions on who and how you can get close to a monument.
No.
Oh, okay.
He was just lazy.
There is not.
Okay.
There is not. You know, so actually what you could do is go on our website and look for the Greeneology program.
Okay.
And for a modest fee, they will take photographs of all of the inscriptions on the monument.
Okay. Wonderful. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, another question. Have any of the victims of local shipwrecks, such as the Lexington, been buried in Greenwood? Any memorials?
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. And actually, I was in touch with a writer I know who is working on a book about the Lexington. There is a monument in Cedar Dell, which is a circular burial pattern, and the Dutch Reformed Church. And there was a monument that was just sticking up out of the ground, and you could see this ship that was on fire. But the monument itself had sunk into the ground. And so 5-10 years ago, our restoration team went out and pulled the monument out of the ground. And it is a tribute, it is a gravestone for the chief engineer of the Lexington.
Oh, wow.
And the design is based on the Currier print. I showed you Nathaniel Currier buried at Greenwood. His first successful print that launched his career was this kind of news, breaking news. You couldn't reproduce photographs in newspapers. And so he did this Lexington, hot off the presses, tragedy print. And that was his first successful print. And obviously that print was used as the model for this carved marble gravestone, this wonderful gravestone. And so I was out there just a couple of months ago taking photographs of it. And will be in that book about the Lexington. We also have another Greenwood and Huntington tie is the General Slocum in 1904. Over 1,000 people died, and they were coming out to Huntington to picnic, this church outing, and never made it past Hell's Gate.
If someone wanted to find this specific monument, we could just go on your website and search by name.
They could email me.
Okay.
I would send them a photograph, a map, and an image of how to find it.
Okay. Jeff, you may have one of the coolest jobs I've ever heard.
It is fun, I must say. So yeah, it's having been across the grounds thousands of times, I still find it remarkable but enchanting that I can still go out there and see something I've never seen before and make a discovery. We have this, what we call the exhausted angel. And it's a kind of a sculptor's joke of an angel holding a mallet and a chisel. And for years, I knew the signature was on it, but I couldn't read it. And I puzzled over it, and I tried to photo adjust it, and Photoshop it. And then one day I needed to get a photograph because we were gonna have a docent out there talking about it. And it happened to be drizzling. And because of the drizzle, when I walked over and looked at the signature, now I could begin to read it. And so it then led to, there's a blog post on that, which I think people can find. And so some of the best and most exciting discoveries over the years. So yeah, it's the job does have its good points.
It sounds amazing. And I'll send out that blog too. I'll send everybody to your blog, the website. And Jeff and I had planned for October of 2020 to do a trolley tour, but that didn't happen. But hopefully we will get it back.
Hopefully we'll be seeing people, not necessarily the people from all over the world who have joined us today, but hopefully see people from Huntington on a tour of Greenwood that I would be happy to lead, and also on our Building the Brooklyn Bridge talk and book signings. So hopefully we'll be able to work that out.
Yes, as soon as we get our in-person lunch and learns back, we would love to have Jeff come and talk about the Brooklyn Bridge. And that's the 3D presentation he mentioned. So that's one we really want to do in person. So hopefully in the fall we can get those going again. All right, well, that looks like about the end of our questions. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the amazing things behind your head? Just briefly.
It's just, over the years, primarily on trips up to Maine and Massachusetts, a number of years ago, seeing things that appealed to me shape-wise and also in terms of the tradition of what they had been used for over time. And so this is just one wall that I have here. And all sorts of really 19th century tools, eel spears up there. And yeah, so the shapes appealed to me, and the history and the idea that someone had held that in their hands as a tool and it had advanced whatever they were trying to accomplish appealed to me. They're a little hard to dust, but that's another issue.
It must have taken you forever to do that beautiful layout.
It did take a while.
Always in the works. All right. Well, we're getting lots of thank yous and appreciations in the chat, which I will send over to you. And thank you so much from the Huntington Historical Society. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. Hopefully we will see you next time, and we'll be able to see you in person for Jeff's Brooklyn Bridge Talk.
All right, great. Well, thank you. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks, Jeff.
Bye now. Thank you.